Hi guys, my name is Sherman and this is Sherman Spectrum where we get to talk about LGBT related films. Okay, so for today's video, I am taking you guys all the way to France because that is one of my favorite French films or favorite French queer genre of film. I really do love French films in general, but French queer films are kind of my go-to. I really enjoy them. So the first film on the list, because I have my little notes here because I want to be consistent, is going to be a film that came out in the early 2000s, and that is Come Undone or Prescurant or Prescurie. I hope I pronounced that correctly. I am not French, so if I butcher any of these names, I do apologize in advance. And also, there will be spoilers in the video, so just be warned. Okay, so basically, Come Undone features two main protagonists, and that is Matthew and Cedric. Basically, these two guys meet in the summer of France. They develop this sexual relationship, which kind of causes controversy between Matthew and his parents. At this point, Matthew already suffers from depression, and when his relationship with Cedric ends, he does try to commit suicide, which is kind of failed. He does end up talking to a psychiatrist about his problems and his emotions. Eventually, at the end of the film, he ends up going back to the south of France to meet one of Cedric's ex-boyfriends. Personally, because this is Sherman Spectrum and we get to talk about my personal opinion, I did like this film. It is a little bit morbid and dramatic, yes. Probably because it came out in the early 2000s. I don't really think that gay representation back in the early 2000s was really what it is today. So it is pretty depressing and it is for mature audiences. So please be mindful when you watch this. It is a bit of a slow burner as well, but I do really enjoy the film. The film does star Jeremy Alcon, I hope that's correct, and Stéphane Redu. These are two very well-known French actors actually, and they're pretty good actors as well. All right, at number two, we're going to talk about I don't know, this film is really good, also very dramatic ending. It is 120 beats per minute. This film is directed by Robin Campello, and it's basically a historical drama set in the early 80s, late 80s, early 90s. It basically deals with the AIDS pandemic in France, and the film revolves a activist group called ACT UP who go to really extreme measures to try and get their message across because the French government is kind of censoring information about HIV/AIDS. The film also has a dynamic plot twist or a dynamic character involvement between two characters called Nathan and Sean. Nathan is HIV negative, who is a new member of the ACT UP group. He then eventually falls in love with Sean, who is kind of the veteran of the activist group, who is diagnosed HIV positive. Basically, the two fall in love. Sean dies at the end of the film. It's quite dramatic and sad because, gays can't be happy. But interesting enough, the film is really well done. It's a 2017 film, and it's really, really, really good. Okay, that's all I gotta say. All right, coming at number three, this is also a very well-known French film. Okay, it's pretty well-known, and that is Blue is the Warmest Color. This is a 2013 coming-of-age film which features two female love protagonists, basically Léa Seydoux and Adèle Extraphilopoulos. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Like I said, I'm really sorry. Basically, 15-year-old Adele thinks that she knows what her life is set for her. She's 15. She knows that boys should date girls. Boys should date girls. I'm so sorry. I'm so confused with sexuality these days. Anyway, basically she meets Emma. Emma is kind of like most other protagonists. She's there to introduce her to a new sense of sexuality and opens her up. The blue color of her hair is kind of her way of expressing that she's different from the rest, and the film does have its average teenage angst. There's the rediscovering yourself and then losing yourself and then not being sure of who you are, which is what we deal with Adele. But, you know, I watched this film back in 2013 and I didn't really get it or like it. I rewatched it a couple of years later and I actually had a huge respect for this film. I don't think this film would be as good if it was probably done in another country like the USA or England. I think the French just really have a way of not being censored or caring about what they put out. You know, it's really done really well. Okay. Next on the list, we're going to talk about one of my other favorite films, which is Summer of '85. Okay, Summer of '85 is a 2020 Belgian film. I'm sorry, guys. My notes are like all over the place. Summer of '85 is a 2020 French-Belgian movie which stars Felix Villon and Benjamin Winslow. Okay, I watched this film back in the pandemic. It is really good. It is really, really good. It also takes place in the early 80s, and a lot of people have compared this to Call Me by Your Name because we're dealing with, you know, the 80s. It's guys are falling in love. But actually, I would say that this film is more grounded, it's more centered, and it's also more on the morbid side, which kind of, because one of the main protagonists kind of has this obsession with the death. For those of you guys that didn't know, Summer of '85 is actually based on a British novel called Dance on My Grave by Aidan Chambers. I did try reading this book last year, but for some reason I couldn't really get through it. It just bored me. And I know some people have read it. I know that the director of the film read it when he was 17 and always wanted to make this film, and he eventually ended up doing that 35 years later. So if you want to watch the actual book, it's called Dance on My Grave by Aidan Chambers. Personally, I prefer the French film. Okay, and last on the list is I Am Jonas. I Am Jonas is a 2018 French film, coming of age film, which stars Félix Neutron, and he also stars in 120 beats per minute. This is also a coming of age film, and it basically deals with Jonas, who is kind of figuring out who he is as well, and figuring out what his sexuality is. So basically, the film kind of takes place between the past and the present, and the present and the past, because we kind of get the feeling that something traumatic happened in Jonas's past, and the reason of that is because he meets a boy called Nathan. Nathan joins his school. The two form a very, very, very quick friendship and end up dating. And apparently Nathan's mother is quite okay with this, where Jonas's parents are kind of oblivious. Okay, so I don't want to spoil too much about this film because I really do want you guys to watch it. It literally is a good film. Now, there are some honorable mentions when it comes to French queer cinema because there is actually quite a lot. But I don't want to talk about them because some of them are just heavy to watch. But I do know that Being 17 is a really great French film. I do know that Sauvage, also, I think it's Wild, is also a really good French film. And Departure. So Departure is not a French film. This is not a French film, but it does take place in France. And it does have the protagonist Alex Lawther from The End of the World, and I only watched it because I kind of had a crush on Félix Borzan because he's a really amazing French actor. But personally, a lot of people hate this film, a lot of people love it. I also personally didn't like it, but I just watched it because of the French actor. Alright guys, that's it for this video. If you would like to see more content like this, please like and subscribe so I can produce more authentic, more realism, more better content. Thank you. This has been Sherman, and this is Sherman Spectrum. I'll see you guys in the next video.